Mitzvah number 222 is the mitzvah of divorce. This is based on a pasuk in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 24. And there it says that if you will not find love or chen, grace, in the eyes of this woman, then v'chasav la sefer krisus, you shall write her a bill of divorce, v'nosam biyadaha, and you shall place it in her hand, v'shilcha mibeisoi, and send her away from his house. The Rambam goes on to explain that there's no mitzvah, there's no actual obligation that a man should divorce his wife, but only in the case where, God forbid, there's a case of immorality, promiscuity in the marriage, or abuse, that one is allowed to divorce his wife. And if he so chooses to divorce his wife, he's not allowed to simply say goodbye, it's over, but he must write a bill of divorce. Furthermore, we find when it comes to a ketubah, which is the marriage contract, here we say you can take a copy from a copy machine and just fill in the names and it's fine. When it comes to a divorce, a get, the law is that the sofer needs to write the entire get in front of the couple, and then the husband gives the get to the wife. And the idea over here is to procrastinate and to cause the husband and the wife to think over what's happening. Perhaps they can come back together, they can reconcile, they can work things out, because the Torah does not want someone to divorce. If, God forbid, there needs to be a divorce, then you have a mitzvah. And the mitzvah is to write the get, to write the bill of divorce. What is the remez? That's the pshat. What's the remez, the hint? We are told that husband and wife represent God and the Jewish people. And the idea of marriage, kiddushin, is Matan Torah, when the Jews receive the Torah on Sinai. Girushin, divorce, is when the Jews were sent into exile. They left the Holy Temple. They left the land of Israel. This is the concept of Girushin, the concept of being banished from one's land, the concept of divorce. We find that in the Code of Jewish Law in Even Ezer, the laws of divorce are found in Simin Kuf Yutes. The laws of divorce are found in chapter 119. It's interesting how everything in Torah is exact. Why is it that the laws of divorce start from chapter 119 in the Code of Jewish Law? If you add up the word dima, which means tears, it equals 119. In that very first chapter dealing with the laws of divorce, it says that a person should be careful not to divorce his wife. Why? Even if there are many reasons why he should, one should try to reconcile and not divorce his wife. Why? Because it says that even the Holy Temple, and in the Holy Temple there's a mizbeach, which is the altar, and according to the Rambam, this was the main vessel in the Holy Temple. It says that the mizbeach, this altar, cries when a husband and wife divorce. And therefore, the word dima, which is crying, is 119. And so already the Shulchan Aruch tells us that this idea of divorce is a concept that brings to tears. This is a concept of tremendous pain and sorrow. And therefore one should be careful not to cause strife with his partner and spouse, but rather to try to keep shalom bayis, to try to keep peace in the house. And here too is the remez, the hint, that even though the Jewish people are in exile and they are banished from God, still in all the altar cries. In other words, God feels our pain in exile. Anochi imay b'tzara, God says, I am together with you in your pain. I am together with you in your time of sorrow and in your time of distress. And this is the hint that just like God feels our pain, so too, once again, God will return and bring us back to the land of Israel. What is drush? Homiletics. A get, as we stated earlier, is something that has to be written by a sofer, by a scribe, in front of the husband and the wife. If for some reason they're not there, it's done through a shaliach, through an emissary, but it must be written, the entire get, the entire bill of divorce has to be written lishma lishma, for the sake of the husband and the sake of the wife, from the very beginning until the very end. How many lines is a get? How many lines are written in this bill of divorce? So the Talmud tells us we write 12 lines in the bill of divorce. Why 12 lines? For the word get is gimel tes. Gimel is 3. Tes is 9. 9 and 3 together is 12. And these are the amount of lines that should be written in a get. How do we get this number of 12? So we find that Teitzei tells us that this is derived from the words here in the passage. You shall write for her a sefer krisus, a bill or a book of divorce. Sefer means Sefer Torah. The Holy Sefer Torah that Moses wrote and gave to us are 5 books of Moses. But the first 4 books of Moses, God dictated to Moshe letter by letter. The 5th book, God told Moshe the general concept of each chapter, and Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it in his own words. But between one book and the next, there is a division, a separation of 4 lines that are empty in each Sefer Torah. So between Bereshis and Shemos, between Genesis and Exodus, there are 4 lines. Between Exodus and Leviticus, another 4 lines. Between Leviticus and Numbers, again another 4 lines. These are the separations of the first 4 books. 4 plus 4 plus 4 is 12. So we derive that a get needs to have 12 lines like a Sefer Torah. So this is the drush. What is the soid? What is the esoteric concept of get? The Rebbe's father, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, says that the word get means shavira, it means to break. The idea of a get is it breaks the relationship, it breaks the marriage between husband and wife. Furthermore, if you take the miloi, the filler of each letter of get, in other words, if you spell out Gimel Tes, the Gimel is Gimel Yud Mem. Tes, Gimel is Yud Mem Lamid. And Tes is Tes Yud Saf. If you take the additional letters of Yud Mem Lamid and Yud Saf, it equals 490, 490. The 490 is the milois, the filler letters of the word get. The number 490, says the Rebbe's father, is the same as the word which means to break or to demolish. As we find in the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, chapter 14, verse 45, it says there, V'notzatz es habayis, you shall break the house, you shall demolish the home. The word tats, which is tough, tzaddik, equals 490. 490 is again the milli of get. So we see on both levels, get means, number 1, to break. And furthermore, even the milui, the filler letters of the word get, also means to demolish the home. What does Chassidus say? Chassidus says that there seems to be here a contradiction. On one hand, the get seemingly severs the relationship. Yet, on the other hand, we find that the idea of get represents unity. How do we see this? We see this on many levels. On the first level, as we stated earlier, the get in the Torah is called a Sefer Krisos, a book of divorce. A book, Sefer, represents the Sefer Torah, a holy Torah scroll. And we derive from this that just like a holy Torah scroll has to have sirtut, it has to have lines in it, you have to first make lines before you write the letters, so too a get, a bill of divorce, you first need to make lines in it. Number two is just like a Sefer Torah, each page, the length is longer than the width. The same is true, a get also has to have the length, should be longer than the width. Furthermore, the Rambam says that the whole Torah was given for one purpose, la'aseh shalom ba'olam, to make peace in the world. So here we see the first part of the get is a Sefer Torah, which means it has to be shalom, it has to be peace. On the other hand, we call it krisos. We call it a severing, something which severs the relationship between the husband and wife. So is it to unify or is it to separate? Furthermore, we said earlier that the get needs to have 12 lines. Why? Because between one book of the Torah and the other book of the Torah, there's a separation of 4 plus 4 plus 4. So that's 12 lines. So therefore, you have to write the bill of divorce in 12 lines. On the other hand, it's based on a Sefer Torah. The Torah is called Torah Achas, one Torah. It's not two Torahs, it's one Torah. It's one Torah that talks about one God. So here, Torah represents the idea of unity. Furthermore, if we look into the actual pasuk, at the very beginning of chapter 24, what do we see? Again, it talks about unity. On one hand, it says a man will take a woman for a wife. And then it says he will make a bill of divorce. So the idea of the bill of divorce is in the same passage of marriage. You would think the Torah would separate it into two separate passages. Yet the Torah equates the divorce with the marriage. Furthermore, in Pasuk 2 it says, V'yasa, she will go out, and she will become married to somebody else. Again, the idea of separation brings about the idea of unity. So is a get the idea of separation, or is the idea of get unity? And here we find a very interesting discussion and talk given by the Rebbe, that in the very beginning of the tractate dealing with divorce, which is the tractate of Gittin, the very first Mishnah starts with the words Hamevi get, one who brings a divorce from Medinas Hayam, from a foreign country which is on the other side of the ocean. This is the way the tractate of Gittin starts out. Now you would think that when Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, the author of the Mishnah, put together the Mishnah and he writes now an entire tractate dealing with get, he would start off with the practical things. Number one is when and if one should give a divorce. Are you allowed to divorce your wife? Number one. Number two is if you are allowed to divorce your wife, then how do you write the get? You need 12 lines, and how do you write it? What words do you use? Number three is after you establish that you could give a get, and you establish how to write the get, now you have to know the laws of how to give a get. Can you put it in the mail? Can you send it via email? Can it be text? Could it be through Facebook? There are many laws of how to give a get. Does it have to be physical? Etc., etc. After you establish that the get has to be given physical with a piece of paper, then it goes on to speak about who can deliver the divorce. In other words, really the husband should give it to his wife. But let's say the husband can't do it for some reason. So who is kosher to be an emissary, a shliach, to bring over the bill of divorce? Says the Mishnah, Hakol Keshedim La Havi Get. Everybody is kosher to bring a get, besides who? One who is deaf and mute, one who is deranged, and a minor. These three are not suitable to be a shaliach, to be an emissary. And then another detail in the laws of shalichus, another detail in the laws of being an emissary is, if the husband is far away in a different country and he wants to send a get to his wife in Israel, how does he do it? Says the Mishnah, you should know, if that's the case, and you said now shluchim, two emissaries, to bring over the get, they have to say that this get before me was written, and before me this get was also signed. So those are the two words, or the two statements that the witnesses must make. Before me it was written, and before us it was signed. Comes the question to mind, as the Rebbe asks, if that is the case, why then does the opening statement in the tractate of Gittin that deals with divorce start with the case which is so unusual, that the husband is on the other side of the ocean and he happens to send the get through emissaries because he himself could not bring it, and how when they come there they have to say, you should know this bill of divorce was written before us, and this bill of divorce was also signed before us. So the Rebbe goes on to explain that we know that marriage, the marriage between husband and wife down here in this world, emanates from the marriage between husband and wife in heaven, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Almighty God, and Knesset Yisrael, the Jewish people. And marriage, Kedushin, betrothal started at Matan Torah, when God gave us the Torah and Sinai. At that time He gave us the mitzvot, He gave us the commandments, and that is why every time we do a mitzvah, what do we say? Asher kidishanu b'mitzvosav. God, you have betrothed us with the mitzvah. The word marriage is kedushin, which means holy. So God betrothed us and He made us holy with the mitzvah. So every time we do a mitzvah, we are reminded that God betrothed us at Sinai. The word kedushin, which we translate to mean betrothal, also means holy. The definition of holy is kadosh umuvdal, separated. God separated us from all the other nations of the world. And that's the idea of marriage. When you marry this woman, she now becomes separated from all the other maidens in the world. Till now, technically, you could have chosen another woman. Now, through Kedushin, she becomes holy, and she becomes separated, and you and her become one bond, you become one entity. And therefore, both of you are now separated from the rest of the world. Till now, either of you could have married somebody else. But now that you're married, you become Kodesh, you become holy, and you become separated from all the other men and women of the entire world. That is the idea of Kiddush and marriage. We became married, betrothed to God. What is Gerushin? What is divorce? Golus, exile. When the Jewish people were banished into exile, we became divorced from God. Comes the question to mind, how is it possible? How is it possible that if God married us, that we should be divorced from God? God is infinite, God is everywhere, and yet there's a possibility that we should be severed from God. It makes no sense. How can there be a spiritual divorce? Furthermore, according to halacha, when a husband gives his wife a divorce, he's not allowed to have any strings attached. He has to give it to her in her own domain. If he is together with her in her domain, it does not become hers. The wife has to have total control over the divorce. So if the husband gives the divorce to the wife, even if he's 10 feet away, but he has a string, the string's attached, and he could pull the get out of her hand, it's not a kosher divorce. So God is everywhere. If God is everywhere and we are in God's domain, how can God divorce us and banish us from his domain? Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, the author of the Mishnah, says that the way it's possible for there to be a divorce in heaven, and after there's a divorce in heaven, there's the ability to be a divorce down here in the physical world, is because God is where? He's on the other side of the ocean. What does that mean? That God is on the other side of the ocean? What causes God to be on the other side of the ocean? The other side of the ocean is the opposite of Eretz Yisrael, of Israel. Israel is a place, as the Medrash tells us, that one runs to do the will of God. When a Jew runs to do the will of God, he's in Eretz Yisrael. However, when we violate Torah law, when we neglect Torah law, furthermore, when we have no desire to do the Torah law, then basically what happens is we are now foreigners. We are far away from God. It's interesting to note that to get to the other side of the ocean, you need a ship. You can't swim, and you can't swim on another human being, and you can't even swim on an animal, but rather you need to have a ship. A human being represents intellect, an animal represents emotions, and therefore the Torah tells us that we are dealing here with one that is on the other side of the ocean. In other words, we have no desire intellectually to connect with God, and God forbid the Jew has no desire emotionally to connect with God. Because there is no desire here to be in this marriage, to be in this relationship, neither intellectually and neither emotionally. So we are the ones that banish God. We cause God to leave us, and therefore God goes up to the higher heavens and he conceals himself from us. So therefore Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, when he wrote the Mishnah, when he speaks about the idea of get, of divorce, realizing that the entire idea of divorce stems from heaven, because everything down here is a reflection of the higher worlds, he asks the question, how is it possible for there to be a separation between Jew and God? How is it possible for God to give a Jew a divorce if God is everywhere and the entire world is his hamakom, his domain? And therefore the answer is we caused God to leave. We banished God through our sins. Because we had no desire and no love and no yearning to want to be with him anymore, therefore technically God left us. However, a smart person knows that even if we don't see God physically, God is still here spiritually. As it says, Anoichi, Haster Aster, I will conceal myself. But even after I conceal myself, you still have the Anoichi, the essence of God. And because of that, because God is truly everywhere, in essence, there is no concept of a divorce. There is no such thing that God divorces himself from the Jewish people. Yes, it's true externally, God says, if you don't like me, so I don't like you. Fine, I'll give you a divorce. But the purpose of divorce, says the Torah, is to create a greater unity. The objective of this separation is absence makes the heart grow fonder. To want to return to your husband, who now becomes another husband. It's the same husband, but he's not the same husband that you left, because now your love for him is much deeper. And therefore you remarry him. You remarry that same husband. And therefore the Torah tells us that it's a mitzvah to divorce. What do you mean a mitzvah? In other words, that the concept of divorce leads to mitzvah. Mitzvah means tzavtza v'chibur, means connection. That through this concept of being alienated, through this concept of absence, we will have a deeper relationship with God. Up until now, it was only emotional. Up until now, it was only intellectual. I studied the Torah. I liked God. I did the mitzvahs. I had an emotional attachment to the holidays. And therefore God gave me blessing and He gave me long life and all these things. However, Golus tells us that God loves us even if, God forbid, we violated the Torah. And furthermore, we love God even if God banished us. And we don't forsake His Torah, we don't forsake His mitzvot, we don't forsake His laws. On the contrary, when God sees that even though He banished us from the land of Israel, and even though we are in Golus, and yet the Jews do mitzvahs with self-sacrifice, beyond intellect and beyond emotion, simply because God tells us to do this, and even though perhaps we don't understand what we're doing, but we know that this is God's will, we do it anyway, this brings about a greater unity and a greater connection between man and God. And this is the mitzvah of divorce, that the objective is to bring back the Jews to the land of Israel, to reunite God with the Jewish people. I would like to end with a story that I heard from the senior Dayan of Sydney, Australia, Rabbi Ullman. And he tells the story like this. The teacher of Rashi was Rabbeinu Gershom. And he was called the light of the exiles. What is he famous for? He's famous for two basic rules. He's famous for the rule that a man cannot force a divorce onto his wife. A woman has the right to refuse the divorce, and therefore she has to accept it with her own free will. That is the law that Rabbeinu Gershom established. Number two, Rabbeinu Gershom came along and said that a man is not allowed to marry two wives. He can only be married to one woman at a time. These are the two laws that he established. And the question that is asked amongst the sages is, why do these two laws merit to give him the status of being called the light of the exiles? And the answer is as follows. As we established earlier, that the marriage between man and woman derives from the marriage between God and the Jewish people. And so God, who is the husband, when He sees how the Jewish people go into exile, and when He sees that the Jewish people begin to violate the laws of the Torah, God says, you know what, I don't like you anymore. You began to violate my Torah. You're breaking my Shabbos. You're breaking the laws of kosher. You're breaking the laws of tefillin. You know what? I want to give you a divorce. I want to choose another nation. I want to get rid of you. The Jewish people say, God, you want to give us a divorce? Too bad. We're not accepting it. A woman has to accept the divorce with their own free will. You cannot force a divorce upon us. God says, you're right. I have to follow the laws of the sages. Because the sages say you cannot force a woman to take a divorce, I cannot force you to take my divorce. But you know what? I can marry another woman. I'll take another nation besides you. Come along the Jewish people and say, God, you can't do that. Rabbeinu Gershom said, you're not allowed to marry a second wife. And therefore you are not allowed to take another nation in addition to us. You're stuck with us. And because of this, he is called the Me'er HaGoyla, he is called the light of the exiles. That even in the exile we see the light of God, the love of God, the light of Torah and the love of mitzvahs. And we hope and pray that from this long exile, from this long separation, from this long gerushin, from this long divorce. It will bring a greater love and a greater unity and a greater passion between Almighty God and the Jewish people, with the ultimate love and the ultimate new home, with the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days.